Imagine risking everything to protect others, only to be treated like a criminal. This is the story of Malcolm Wright, a dedicated security guard who stopped a robbery in its tracks, yet found himself handcuffed and accused. In a world where appearances can deceive, Malcolm's courage is tested as he battles against injustice and betrayal. Stay with us as we dive into this powerful tale of perseverance, where the truth may be silenced, but it never stays buried. It was a quiet evening at the upscale jewelry store located in one of the most exclusive districts of the city. Malcolm Wright, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his late 40s, stood near the entrance, eyes sharp and alert. After years of working security, Malcolm had developed an intuition for trouble, an instinct that had served him well throughout his career. The jewelry store was a prime target for robberies, with its gleaming display cases filled with diamonds, gold watches, and other high-priced luxury items. The store's soft lighting reflected off the polished marble floors, casting a warm glow over the sparkling jewels that attracted wealthy clients. As usual, most customers didn't give Malcolm a second glance. To them, he was just a fixture in the store, blending into the background. But Malcolm didn't mind. He took pride in his work, knowing that his presence provided a layer of safety, even if it went unnoticed. Tonight, however, there was an unusual tension in the air, and his instincts were on high alert. A man entered the store, dressed sharply in a designer suit, but something about him didn't sit right with Malcolm. His eyes darted around the room, lingering too long on the security cameras, and his hands fidgeted with the expensive watch on his wrist. Malcolm had seen this kind of behavior before. It was subtle, but it screamed trouble. Malcolm approached him with quiet confidence, his voice calm but firm. "Good evening, sir. Can I assist you with anything?" The man forced a smile. "No, just looking around," he replied, his voice strained. Malcolm gave a slight nod, but stayed nearby, watching as the man moved toward one of the more isolated display cases. There was something about his body language, nervous, almost too controlled, that put Malcolm on edge. His instincts told him that tonight, something was about to go wrong. As he continued his rounds, he couldn't shake the sense that the store, with its millions of dollars in inventory, was about to become the center of a major incident, and Malcolm would be at the heart of it, though no one would believe him. The quiet evening took a sudden turn when Malcolm noticed the same man from earlier standing suspiciously close to one of the display cases in the far corner of the store. It was one of the more secluded sections, far from the entrance and out of the direct view of most of the security cameras. Malcolm's instincts flared once again. The man glanced around, checking to see if anyone was watching. Then, with a swift motion, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small tool, using it to carefully tamper with the lock on the glass case. The sound of the tool scraping against the metal lock was faint, but to Malcolm, it was deafening. Without hesitation, Malcolm made his move. He approached swiftly but calmly, aiming to defuse the situation before it escalated. "Excuse me, sir. I need you to step away from the display," Malcolm said, his voice steady but commanding. The man froze, caught it in the act. His face shifted from shock to anger as he straightened up, holding his hands out as if to feign innocence. "I wasn't doing anything," he protested loudly, drawing the attention of the few remaining customers in the store. "You're accusing me of something I didn't do." Malcolm remained firm. "Please step away from the display case, sir," he repeated, motioning for one of the store clerks to call the police. But before the situation could be fully contained, the store manager, Mr. Higgins, entered the scene, having heard the commotion from his office in the back. Higgins was a middle-aged man, known for his strict demeanor, but also for his tendency to cater to the wealthier clientele. He quickly assessed the situation and, without even listening to Malcolm's explanation, turned his attention to the well-dressed man. "I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding, sir," Mr. Higgins said, his voice dripping with politeness. "I'm sure there's been a mistake." The man, sensing an opportunity, leaned into the role of the offended customer. "This is outrageous. Your security guard just accused me of trying to steal. Do you know who I am?" Malcolm, maintaining his composure, attempted to explain. "I saw him tampering with the lock." He was about to, but Mr. Higgins cut him off sharply. "That's enough, Malcolm. I don't need your input right now." Malcolm felt a knot tightening in his chest. He had done exactly what he was trained to do, but instead of being supported, he was being silenced. The man who had clearly attempted to rob the store was now being treated like a victim, while Malcolm stood accused of making a baseless accusation. "Please, escort this man out of the store, Malcolm," Mr. Higgins ordered. "We can't afford to offend our clientele." It was the first blow to Malcolm's dignity that night. Not only had his instincts been dismissed, but the real criminal was walking away free simply because of his appearance and status. As the man left, casting a smug glance at Malcolm, the guard knew that this was only the beginning of a long night of injustice. The incident with the suspect lingered in Malcolm's mind long after the man left the store. His smug expression seared into Malcolm's memory. He had done his job, and yet he was treated like the one who had committed a wrong. But the injustice didn't end there. The following morning, Malcolm arrived at work expecting some resolution. Perhaps Mr. Higgins had reviewed the security footage and realized the truth. Maybe he would apologize for doubting Malcolm's judgment the previous night. But when Malcolm walked through the glass doors of the jewelry store, he was met with cold stares from the rest of the staff. Whispers followed him as he made his way to the security office, his colleagues exchanging glances and shaking their heads. As he sat at his desk, reviewing the security logs, Malcolm was called into Mr. Higgins' office. The room felt suffocating, with its dark wood paneling and the overwhelming scent of polished furniture. Higgins sat behind his desk, flipping through some paperwork, barely acknowledging Malcolm's presence as he entered. "Malcolm, I've received some complaints about your conduct last night," Higgins began, his tone sharp and dismissive. "The customer you confronted was highly offended. He's an important figure in this community, and we can't afford to alienate people like him." Malcolm's chest tightened. "But sir, he was trying to rob the store. If you check the footage, you'll see." Higgins waved a hand dismissively, cutting him off. "The footage is inconclusive, and honestly, I'm not interested in revisiting this. What matters is how we treat our clientele. You embarrassed that man, Malcolm. He's not the type of person we can afford to lose as a customer." Malcolm stood in stunned silence. The suspect, the man who had almost stolen from the store, was now being defended, and Malcolm was the one facing consequences. It was as if his years of service, his professionalism, meant nothing in the face of the word of a wealthy customer. "And that's not all," Higgins continued, his voice cold. "Some of the staff have expressed concerns about your attitude. They say you've been overly aggressive, making people uncomfortable. I need you to understand, Malcolm, that this is a luxury establishment. Our customers need to feel welcome, not watched." The words stung. Malcolm had always treated everyone with respect, but now he was being painted as a problem, as if his very presence made the customers uncomfortable. He knew what this was really about. It wasn't his attitude, but his appearance. The color of his skin. "Sir, I've always done my job with integrity," Malcolm responded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've never treated anyone unfairly, and last night..." Higgins cut him off again, his patience wearing thin. "This isn't up for debate, Malcolm. Consider this your final warning. One more complaint, and I'll have no choice but to let you go." As Malcolm left the office, his mind raced. How had things escalated so quickly? In just one night, he had gone from being a trusted employee to walking on thin ice. And the worst part was, no one cared about the truth. The injustice was building, and Malcolm felt the weight of it pressing down on him. Days passed and Malcolm tried to keep his head down, focusing on his duties despite the growing tension around him. The whispers hadn't stopped, and every interaction with Mr. Higgins felt more strained than the last. But then, something unexpected happened, a glimmer of hope. One afternoon, a detective from the local police department came into the store. Detective Harper was an experienced investigator who had dealt with numerous high-profile thefts across the city. He had received a report about a string of attempted robberies in upscale jewelry stores, and Malcolm's description of the suspicious man fit the profile of a suspect they had been tracking for weeks. Malcolm felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone was taking him seriously. He explained everything to Detective Harper. The man's behavior, the tool he had used, the way he had reacted when confronted. The detective listened carefully, nodding as Malcolm spoke, and then asked to review the security footage from that night. For the first time in days, Malcolm felt vindicated. If the detective saw the footage, he would realize Malcolm had done the right thing. This could clear his name and set the record straight. Detective Harper reviewed the tapes in the security room, his face serious as he watched the events unfold. But just as Malcolm began to feel that things were turning in his favor, Mr. Higgins appeared, his face flushed with frustration. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Detective Harper stood up, explaining the situation. "I'm investigating a series of attempted robberies in the area. It seems your guard here may have stopped one in progress." Mr. Higgins didn't seem impressed. "We've already dealt with this, detective. There was no robbery, just a misunderstanding." Malcolm here jumped to conclusions and nearly cost us a valuable customer. Malcolm's heart sank as he watched Higgins dismiss everything so easily. Detective Harper raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical of the manager's response. "With all due respect, Mr. Higgins, this man matches the description of a known criminal we've been tracking. Your security guard may have saved you from a major loss." But Higgins waved him off, insisting, "There's no need for further investigation. I won't have you stirring up unnecessary trouble in my store." Malcolm couldn't believe what he was hearing. Here was a detective willing to help, and yet his manager was blocking the investigation. The hope that had sparked in Malcolm's chest quickly flickered out, replaced by a cold realization Higgins was more concerned with protecting the store's reputation than with the truth. Detective Harper, clearly displeased, gave Malcolm a sympathetic nod. "I'll keep this on file. If anything else comes up, I'll be in touch." As the detective left the store, Malcolm was left standing there, feeling more powerless than ever. He had come so close to clearing his name, but once again, he had been silenced, discredited by the very person who should have had his back. The tension in the store continued to build as the days passed. Malcolm could feel the weight of it in every interaction. His colleagues barely spoke to him, and Mr. Higgins had taken every opportunity to undermine him, constantly reminding Malcolm of his final warning. It was clear that his time at the jewelry store was running out. One evening, just as the store was preparing to close, Malcolm noticed a familiar face on the security monitor, the same man who had tried to rob the store days earlier. He was back, but this time, he wasn't alone. Two other men entered the store with him, all of them dressed in expensive suits, blending in with the upscale clientele. Malcolm's heart raced as he watched the men casually stroll toward the high-value display cases. He knew what was coming. Without hesitating, he grabbed his radio and alerted the rest of the staff. "We've got a situation. Same suspect from before, he's not alone this time." But the response from the staff was indifferent at best. It was clear that no one believed Malcolm. His warning was met with silence, and Mr. Higgins was nowhere to be found. Malcolm had no choice but to act. He positioned himself near the entrance, trying to appear casual as he kept an eye on the men. His pulse pounded in his ears as he watched them carefully, knowing he was the only one standing between the store and a potential robbery. The men moved swiftly. One of them distracted a clerk, asking to see an expensive diamond necklace, while another tampered with the lock on a display case filled with watches. Malcolm moved toward them, ready to intervene, when suddenly Mr. Higgins appeared. "Malcolm, what do you think you're doing?" Higgins' voice cut through the air like a whip, drawing the attention of the entire store. "They're about to rob us," Malcolm said urgently, his eyes never leaving the men. "The guy from before, he's back, and they're working together." But Higgins wasn't listening. "I told you, Malcolm, enough with these baseless accusations. You're causing a scene." The men, sensing that Malcolm was distracted, began moving faster. One of them pocketed a watch, while another discreetly slid a ring into his jacket. Malcolm could see it all unfolding in real time, but Higgins was standing in his way. "I'm not causing a scene," Malcolm insisted, trying to push past the manager. "I'm doing my job." But Higgins wasn't having it. "Your job is to follow my orders. And right now, I'm ordering you to stand down." At that moment, one of the men made a break for the exit, the others following close behind. Malcolm's instincts took over, and he lunged after them, managing to grab the last man just as he was about to escape. A struggle ensued, the man thrashing in Malcolm's grip as he tried to free himself. "Get off me!" The man yelled, causing a commotion as the few remaining customers gasped and backed away. In the chaos, Mr. Higgins yelled for someone to call the police. But even as Malcolm wrestled with the suspect, Higgins turned on him. "I hope you're ready for the consequences of this, Malcolm. You've crossed the line this time." Malcolm couldn't believe what he was hearing. Here he was, stopping a robbery in progress, and yet he was the one being threatened. But he held firm, keeping the suspect pinned down until the police arrived. When the officers finally entered the store, Malcolm breathed a sigh of relief until he saw the look on their faces. Instead of thanking him for his bravery, they turned their attention to Mr. Higgins, who immediately began spinning the story. "This is all a misunderstanding," Higgins explained. "Our security guard here acted out of line and caused unnecessary trouble." Malcolm's heart sank as the officers took in Higgins' words. They looked at Malcolm with suspicion, as if he were the one at fault. "What are you talking about? I stopped a robbery." Malcolm protested, his voice rising with frustration. But Higgins shook his head. "You assaulted a customer, Malcolm. You've gone too far." The police, following Higgins' lead, began to handcuff Malcolm, ignoring his protests. As they led him away, Malcolm looked back at the store, at the real thieves slipping away into the night. He had done everything right, and yet, once again, no one believed him. As Malcolm sat in the back of the police car, his hands tightly cuffed, he couldn't shake the feeling of deep betrayal. He had done everything right. He had protected the store, his colleagues, and the customers, but none of that seemed to matter. The true criminals had escaped into the night, and he, the man who had stopped them, was the one being treated like a criminal. When they arrived at the police station, Malcolm expected the worst. His mind raced with the potential consequences: losing his job, a criminal record, and a permanent stain on his reputation. But then, as the officers processed him, something unexpected happened. Detective Harper, the same investigator who had come to the jewelry store days earlier, entered the room. His expression was one of concern, but also of quiet determination. "Release him," Harper ordered, much to the confusion of the officers. "A detective." The store manager, one of the officers, began, but Harper cut him off. "I've reviewed the footage again," Harper said, his voice firm. Malcolm was right. The man he apprehended matches the profile of a wanted criminal. Those men were part of an organized group that's been targeting high-end stores across the city. Malcolm blinked in disbelief as the handcuffs were removed. The weight of injustice that had pressed down on him for days was beginning to lift, but it still felt surreal. Detective Harper continued, "You did the right thing, Malcolm. I'm sorry it took this long for the truth to come to light. We've put out an alert for the other suspects, and with your help, we're confident we'll bring them in." A mix of relief and frustration swirled inside Malcolm. He had been vindicated, but the journey to get to this point had been more painful than he could have imagined. But the story didn't end there. The next day, word spread about the attempted robbery, and it wasn't long before the local news stations picked up the story. They broadcast the security footage, showing Malcolm bravely stopping one of the robbers, while also highlighting how the store's management had tried to cover up the incident. The public outrage was immediate. Mr. Higgins, who had previously been so dismissive of Malcolm, found himself under intense scrutiny. The media demanded answers, and the store's reputation, which Higgins had been so desperate to protect, was now in ruins. In a final twist of justice, the store's corporate headquarters issued a formal apology to Malcolm. They offered him a substantial settlement and reinstated his position, but Malcolm had had enough. He declined the offer to return, knowing that no amount of money could undo the harm that had been done to him. As Malcolm walked away from the jewelry store for the last time, he held his head high. He had endured the worst kind of betrayal, but in the end, the truth had come out. The criminals had been exposed, the manager had been disgraced, and Malcolm had regained his dignity. Malcolm's story is a powerful reminder of how quick we are to judge based on appearances. It shines a light on how appearances and assumptions can distort the truth, leading to tragic consequences. Malcolm's journey reminds us that even when the odds are stacked against us, standing firm in the truth can lead to justice, no matter how long it takes. Let this be a reminder to question our biases and to never assume guilt based on appearances. But what would you have done in his situation? Do you think justice was truly served in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories that challenge assumptions and shine a light on real struggles, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Don't miss the next story. We've got more thought-provoking tales coming your way.